So I hope you have read through this case study now. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the business analyst there, and then explain how do you approach this project. Right? So where do you start your requirements for this project? Right?
First, we will gather the information, what the customer wants.
Right.
Like what are the customer requirements.
Right.
We'll do
Now,
that.
Yeah. So in this case, it's clear that it's an AML compliance system. Right. So we have this view. Right. So you're told by your project manager that we'll start a new AML compliance project, and you would be the business analyst for that. Okay. So what do? Where will you start?
Do a RACI matrix. So
right, all that planning part is over. We have completed that planning. So there is a detailed plan also prepared. Now what?
First, find out what the elicitation techniques are. Basically, choose which type of elicitation technique we're going to use.
All right. See, forget about the planning part. All that we have identified as part of the planning. Let me give the context. So you're good with all the planning, and then all your project plan and everything is there. Now you're asked to go and then capture the requirements. So what do? Will you talk to the customer? Will you do will you conduct a workshop? Will you do a reverse engineering? So we were trying to figure out how would you approach this particular project. Okay? Yeah. I think somebody was talking, and then we have. Yeah, go ahead. Rupali, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, after understanding the case study, we would first check the documents which are already available with us for the existing project, and we would try to first go through the existing document. Also, identify who are the stakeholders.
What would be the existing documents? What documents you would ask for?
Existing documents such as the as-is, what to say, the as-is documents. Like if the
or the way the current systems are working. Yes, you could ask.
Right.
It's not process flow documents.
Those kind of,
right?
Yeah, the process documents.
Now, the first thing I would do is, do you guys understand what AML compliance is? I would do this first thing. Right? So what is AML compliance? Right? I should get some basic understanding about what the project is about. Right? So all that, see, that's what I was trying to say. There's a lot of information available over the internet. Right? So the basics of anything, you can find out on the internet. Right? So there's enough information about anything. Right? I think from a system point of view, it's anti-money laundering. Right? Now, you can go in and search, look at Wikipedia, what it means. Right? So, spending like half an hour of time, you're looking at what is money laundering or anti-money laundering, and then what basically are the laws enforcing it, what compliance and which geography are you looking at. Right? It gives you some basic understanding about that requirement. Right? And like you said, getting those documents is the first thing you would generally do. But if you are not even aware of that term, generally do a Google search of what exactly it is. Right? So because you'll come across a lot of such projects where you don't know anything about the project. It's a completely new thing. Right? So there could be like, let's say a credit, credit appraisal. Right? Now, what is a credit appraisal? Right? So, at least you'll understand what that term means by doing a Google search. Right? Similarly, if you pick up any healthcare project, there'll be some like, if you look at regulations, right, in US. Okay. Now there could be a projects to implement, let's look at this and then I'll say, right. So there could be multiple there could be compliance for this EMTALA Act, right? So you need to know what it means, right? So you can get that first level of knowledge by figuring out what it means, at least on the internet, right? So that's the first check. I mean, you don't need somebody to explain what it is about and all. A lot of it, the basics, you will definitely get it out of the internet, right? And like somebody suggested, ask for the documents, right? So, and what documents could it be? It depends on the project, right? So some of them you could ask for process documents. Some of them, you could ask for your training material from for your new joinees, right? And what else? What else could be relevant for this project? Now it's an AML compliance. You know that there is a compliance process. So they are currently doing it manually, and then you want to automate it. Okay. So what all documents? I think somebody told about the process documents. Should you also look at your SOW and then your RFP response, the earlier documents, the project documents? Would it give some indication about what you have committed as part of this system?
Would the documents vary with the locations?
Yes, definitely. Like now this is AML compliance in Malaysia, right? Now if you just Google for that, right? Right. So you'll know, okay, this is what is the regulatory body for all your AML compliance, right? So for Malaysian geography, all the regulations are coming from here. So you know that this is another source which you can look at for your compliance regulatory requirements, right? So so that is what your thought process should be, because nobody is going to tell you, go check here, go check there, right? So a lot of it, you have to think through and then understand where can I look out for information about this project. Okay. Now once you gain some basic understanding, then you'll go through the standard process. You'll list down, okay, if you look at the AML requirements broadly, you'll understand something. Let's do that. Okay. Now if I broadly look at it, maybe PDF page. Right. So basically, what it means is, let's say we look at United States, right? So there is some act called Bank Secrecy Act. Then there is a financial intelligence unit. This is the organization, right? And you need to submit some reports, suspicious activity report, right? And if you just look at what it means from a system point of view, right? So you can figure out, there are so many systems available over the which are offering these requirements, right? So basically, there are some models, like there is an alert generator model, right? And then there is a data management model, quality model. So you can read through some of this stuff and then get some basic understanding. So maybe a day or two you spend figuring out what is it that the system is about, get some understanding, right? So one day, I think if you spend on this one topic, I think you get enough decent knowledge about that particular topic, right? It's not like you have to spend like months together to gain that. Now once you know that these are the key 3 or 4 things that you have to do, right? So then you would have those scheduled calls for your interviews and then your observation techniques, right? So most of your requirements would be done this way. You would have that list of questions prepared. What is the typical process flow? What do you do when some information is missing or some process deviates? What are the preconditions, post conditions? All those questions you would ask, and then gather the detailed requirement about it, right? And then you would create some prototype screens of how your system should look like. Okay, so that should be your approach, right? So it need not be like, everything is dependent on the SME, and then you just go and then ask him, tell me your requirements, right? So that should never be the approach. First, gain that understanding by from secondary sources and the available documents, and once you gain that basic knowledge, then you can further go ahead and schedule those calls, gather the details, right? Now let's look at the rest of the techniques. Like, we know we have used document analysis, we'll use interviews and observation here, right? So we'll use prototyping. Do you think focus group sessions are relevant here? For this example, would you have used a focus group?
Yeah, it could get you more ideas. It would be helpful.
Yeah. So see, that depends on the So see, before you get into this focus groups and all, you should have the clarity of these are the 10 features from this AML system, right? So you would have got that from SOW, right? Now, if you pick up each feature and then say, this is I'll gather the requirements of this feature on this particular day, right? Now you have an option of having an interview, going and talking to the SME, or you could conduct a focus group. So evaluate it. So if you think that if one person can actually tell me the requirement, right? So go and then have an interview session. But if you think it makes sense if I make all this group of people, the SMEs who are identified, sit down and then discuss this particular topic, right? If it actually needs the discussion, then you should conduct a focus group, right? Now, most of the cases, if it's a existing process that you're trying to automate, it might not generally require so much of discussion. But if it's a new requirement, new regulation, and then you'll have to completely set up a new process and all, so that is where most of the discussions could happen, right? So you tend to use a focus group in those kind of situations. So you could decide and then work towards that, right?
I don't think brainstorming is required over here.
Yeah, because there is no new idea which we are generating. The scope is clear. We have these 10, 20 features that we have to deliver, and that has been clearly documented in the SOW. So what is the need of having a brainstorming session now, right? So you and I would not find the need to have a brainstorming session, right? Reverse engineering, you think reverse engineering would be relevant here?
Talking to stakeholders though, to design our requirements according to what they want.
So, but that would be more like a prototyping, right? So if you're taking a validation about how this future system should look like, that's prototyping. If you're trying to understand how is their current system working, right? So maybe it could be a toned down version of your current system, or a manual process also. You could tend to use a reverse engineering technique. It will help you understand the current process of how they are. So in my in this particular project, they were actually using some access-based systems and some Excel-based macros to perform some activities, right? Now, I wouldn't call that a full-fledged system, but still there was some requirement and there was some system which they were using, right? So I tried to use those macros and then the access systems and understood what exactly they were trying to do, right? So reverse engineering was a technique which was useful in that context. Okay.
For this reverse engineering thing, like if we are a new BA in the company or on the project, then we can sit with the QA team, any member of the QA team, while he is doing the black box and understand the as a system, or else sit with any developer to understand this reverse engineering part. So that as is would be more clear, and then we can think of the 2B part.
Right, right. So first, so you definitely use this reverse engineering technique to understand how they are currently working, right? Like I said, they were using some access-based systems. Now access-based system is not a full-fledged system, and they had created those systems to support them at that point, and then they want to replace it with a full-fledged entire end-to-end system, right? So I have to understand how the current system works, what are the gaps in it, and then fill those gaps to come up with a to-be model, right? So that would be the reason. And reverse engineering was a good process to understand the current system, rather than ask those interview questions and have those interviews and ask them what is the requirement here. First, let me understand how you are doing your process, and then I'll figure out what my future state should look like, right? The team was a small team of like 5 people or so, 5 to 10 people, and all were sitting at one single location, and these are the only 5-10 people who will be using the system, right? So you think a surveys and questionnaires are required here? For this particular project? Not really, right? So I mean, there are only 10 people to the max, and out of them, five of them I'm anyway interacting with, and the rest of 5 are very junior folks, right? So there is no need for a survey or a questionnaire or a pilot approach, because the number of people who are using itself is very low, right? So I can just go and talk to them and then figure out what they want, right? So you tend to use the surveys questionnaires only when the user community is large, like at least some 50-100 people, wherein it's not possible for me to go and talk to each one of them. Right? So then I would create a questionnaire. Otherwise, there is no need to waste time in creating questionnaires and then doing it for some 4-5 people. Okay. Workshops also, some requirements we needed to figure out how the to-be process should be like. So we and since these guys were also doing their day-to-day jobs, right? I needed that focused attention from them. So scheduled a couple of days of workshop also, so that I get focused attention onto these requirements, and then we close out on all those finer aspects. But this came in at the end of the the requirement elicitation session. Once all our standard most of the requirements were captured using the standard techniques. So all those disagreements or the requirements which needed further discussions, we scheduled a workshop for that and then closed it out later. Okay. Coming over to the last part on the interfaces. All right. Now, how do you go about identifying the interfaces for this system? Does the system require any interfaces?
I mean, you definitely require interfaces though, because
Right.
you are making an application.
Right.
AML so you need interface.
Yeah. So how do you understand what would be what all interfaces would be there for this system? Right. So now you're saying that you need this AML compliance system, right? So you're developing an AML compliance system. So how do you go about identifying the interfaces for this?
You can Google it, and you can also talk to your coding, like your programmer.
So the programmer is actually dependent on you, right? So you have to tell him, what is what all data needs to come in, or he will have no clue about what is an AML system is. So he'll say, what is an AML system? Why are you asking me?
So basically, if you have to find out the interface, you speak to the other system business analyst or the project manager from the different interface.
Now, who is the other system guy here?
I think it was, if you pull the case back.
Is it an architecture? System architecture?
So the system architect also will not know unless you tell him the requirement, right?
Yeah, it'll
It
be
should
the
be an
different
SME.
interface guy, the second interface that it's connecting with from the other one system to your system.
Yes. So you're saying that you should talk to the other system guy, but who is this other system guy, right? So that would primarily come from your functional requirements, right? Now you have to, the main question to identify the interfaces should be, what data do you need for this system to function, right? What is the input that you're taking, right? And where is it coming from? Then, you'll figure out, okay, this is the other system guy I need to talk to. Similarly, there would be outbound interfaces, which means, you're generating some output. Okay. Now, who will be using this output? If there is another system which you have to send it to, then you would say, what, there needs to be an interface with the other system, right? So the two main questions to ask is, what data do you need and where is it coming from, and what output are you generating which will be used by other systems. So this would help you in figuring out the interface. So that would be the starting point. That question would help you, figure out system to integrate with. Now, usually these questions would be able to, the SMEs would be able to answer these questions, right? The subject matter experts, because they know the functionality. They will know, what exactly are the inputs that I need. Now, let's do a basic, search on this functionality, right? Yeah. So if I'm just looking at the software, so maybe there are 4 types of requirements. One is transaction monitoring. Then we need to do the currency transaction monitoring, customer identification, and some regulatory requirements, right? And what transaction monitoring means? You are monitoring all the customer transactions on a daily basis, right? So which means you would need all the customer transactions uh, which are performed in the bank, right? Now, where are these customer transactions stored? Maybe in the deposit system or in the loan system, or if there is a core banking system that could have it, right? So we'll have to integrate with that, right? So this is how you have to understand that overall ecosystem. Where is this data coming from? What data do you need, and how would what kind of interface it is? So do you need it at a real time, or only do you need it at the end of the day, right? So that will help you decide whether it's a batch or a real time, right? So basically, there will be a lot of unknowns at the start of the project. But if you start asking that right questions, that is where you tend to uh, you know get the right leads, and then get to the further details about the system, right? So overall, you're expected to do all this. You need to know your customer. You need to do entity resolution. You need to do transaction monitoring. You need to do reporting. You need to do the alert investigation. Right? So these are the things that you need to do from a system point of view. Right? Now, each one of it, you can know what do you mean by KYC. Your customer. Right? So you have to basically understand, capture all the details about the customer, and ensure that they are correct. Okay. So it's a simple requirement. Now, where is this customer information? Maybe there is a system called customer information system which is storing it. Right? Now, is it validating all that information? Maybe not. So should you do that? Yes. Will it fall under the scope? Yes. So if you ask all these questions and then figure out what is the overall scope of your system, you could clearly translate that into your detailed requirements by having those one-on-one discussions with the SME, right? So, but broadly, the approach should be you should be able to ask those right questions. Okay. So unless you ask that question of what data is required for this system, for this function to happen, right? Now, what data is required for completing your KYC, know your customer, Unless you ask that question, you'll not be able to figure out what is the interface there, right? So you need all the customer information. Whenever a new customer is created, that information has to come to you. Now, which system is storing that information? There would be some system in the bank which is storing it, right? So then you'll have to talk to that person and then figure out, what, the business needs these data points, and you send it to me in this particular format, right? So that would be your interface discussion with it. Okay. So broadly, I mean, are you clear about how to approach requirements? I know there would be a lot of unknowns and uncertainties, but if you're able to ask those right questions, you'll be able to understand this. And that clarity will not emerge in in an hour or half an hour or so. Typically you would spend a month or so on the requirements. For a system like this, there would be 1 month which is assigned for capturing the requirements. So you'll not get that complete view right on day one, right? You will not understand all the requirements in day one or in the first hour of the day, right? So you'll have to go through all those unknowns, and through that you have to make sure that you're going in a structured approach using all the techniques at hand, whatever you have, and capture the requirements. Okay. So ideally start off with this document analysis. I'm trying to recap again. So figure out what all documents are available about that requirement. Now ML compliance, just a basic Google is telling you what all needs to be done, right? The other documents what you need to read is what is it that have committed into the scope, right? SOW. Now SOW would have some of these features, let's say, right? So let's say these are the things that are listed down in the SOW as well, right? Then you can go a little deeper and then see KYC. What does know your customer mean, right? It's the process of business verifying the identity of its clients, right? A little more details, we will then go and get it in Wikipedia, right? And then you can ask for the policy documents of the bank, right? So what is your KYC policy, right? So then they would have their own set of policy, what all information they need to perform, what all checks they need to perform. You can check by the country laws as well, right? And for some customers, you need to get some additional documents. So what are those some customers and what additional documents we need to get, right? If you drill down further, you'll start getting the more details. So earlier we didn't even know what AML compliance is, but we figured out, by looking at the SOW and doing some minor research on the internet, we know that that KYC is one part of the requirement. So if I drill down further and look at KYC requirements, I'm getting a little more details about it. Now, if I'm purely dependent on the SME to tell me all these details, right? You'll not be able to complete your job, right? So because he has to make you sit and then explain you for hours, right? So you have to use a combination of all these techniques to gather the requirements, right? So initial document analysis, maybe 1 hour you'll spend on KYC, and then you'll fairly have some basic understanding about it. Then what? You'll go and meet the customer. Okay. Then you'll ask, what? I understand that this is your KYC policy. I read through your KYC policy, and broadly this is the requirement, right? Now, then you'd get into further questions like what are those additional checks that we need to perform, right? And how are you doing it currently, right? So which is nothing but your observation technique and maybe a part of your reverse engineering technique if there is a system in place, right? So you'll try to understand the current process and then figure out what exactly is a challenge or gap in the current way of doing things, right? Then you'll go back and then think through and then say, what, how can we do it better, right? So then you'll design how the system should look like. You'll create the prototypes and then say that that your system would look like this. Okay, so then the customer would provide his feedback. What the screen should have some additional details which are missing out because we need that as part of our KYC, right? So you'll add in those details. Then they will say, what, you can change the layout of the screen a little bit. So you'll make that change. So after all the feedback is done, the customer would sign off that requirement. Okay, so a typical process would be like that, right? So from a stage where we know nothing about an AML system, we have got to finalize one requirement, which is the KYC, right? Now we still don't know what a transaction monitoring would mean, right? So transaction monitoring, if I say, again in the context of AML, right? Now, you'll get some more details about it, right? You'll read through that, and then you need to figure out what type of transactions needs to be monitored, what kind of checks we need to perform. So you'll get into details about it. So all this again would take time. You're not going to do that in 1 day or 1 hour, right? I'm trying to just show you the path of how you should approach it, right? Now, I'm not saying gather all the requirements from the internet, or I'm also not saying gather all the requirements from the from the SME, right? So use a combination of all, right? So spend some time figuring out the general requirements, then list down the questions which you should ask, right? I gave you some broad framework of what kind of questions you should ask. Then go and then talk to the SMEs, then watch them do it, then come back and then document it, right? So wherever you need focus groups or brainstorming, use them, right? Identify the interfaces based on the functionality, and you have to figure out, what all information you need for this system. Maybe you need all the customer information, you need all the transaction information, and where is this information stored? You'll have to figure out the other system guy, right? So that you'll find out that what you need, the customer information in the customer information system, and the transaction information is in the deposits and loan systems. Okay, so you'll talk to them and then tell them that this is the data I need. Now you need to extract and give it to me. And how frequently you need? I need it on a daily basis. So at the end of the day, they'll create a file of all the transactions which is coming, and put that into a file server. You'll pick it up from there and then upload it, right? So you're finalizing all the requirements in this way, right? Now it's a little complex example that I'm taking, right? So maybe and I'm trying to explain that within half an hour or 1 hour time. So it might look like it too much of things, but generally you'll get a month's time for a requirement of this magnitude, right? 1.5 months to capture your requirements. So you'll have enough time to actually think through, and then each point of the statement of work that you have committed, you'll get enough time to read through and then go in a structured way, right? But again, unless you follow all these various methods, utilize a combination of all these methods, you'll be lost of, and you'll be confused. Okay, where should I start my requirements? Is this session helping you in a way to how to organize your thoughts and how to approach a requirement elicitation session? So now you have a fairly high level view of how to approach it.
Yeah, sometimes it is confusing.
Right. So that, like I said, that clarity would not be there at this point in time, because you've not gone through this project. Now, if I give you a simple thing like let's say a hospital management system, it will not be this confusing, because we fairly tend to understand the functionality of it, right? So what would a hospital management system be? There would be a patient preservation. There would be a doctor. When a new doctor joins in, you have to onboard a new doctor. When a patient comes in, you have to register him. Then they would have to create an appointment. Then you'll make a payment for it, right? It's so simple, right? But as and when the complexity increases, the techniques what we use for our requirement elicitation also changes, right? So we'll have to effectively utilize them, and you'll have to analyze and ask those right questions to gather it, right? So usually, the projects will not be this complex. The reason I have taken this is to bring out that the need for using a combination of all these techniques. Now, if I have taken a simple example like a hospital management system, right? All of it we could just do it ourselves and then take it to the customer and then say, your system should be like this, but which will not be the case. You'll have to be dependent on the SME for a lot of things, like in this case. Since you don't know what AML compliance is, you'll have to depend on him for a few things. You'll get some knowledge from from other sources like your SOW or your business case or your your internet. Multiple sources would be there. Then you'll have to figure out the interfaces, and then you'll have to do some reverse engineering to understand the current process, right? You'll use a combination of all these techniques. As and when the requirements become complex, the more imperative it becomes to use all these techniques. Otherwise, it will just be a one-on-one discussion for simple requirements. Right?
I have a query, like in this class, will you be taking a case study where we, we all the attendees can, work from the starting till the end, that is the finished product, like the making a BRD.
Yeah.
Because
So see,
now you're explaining this case study, we are understanding what elicitation methods to use and what exactly, but will we be working on any case study?
Right. So once we understand about the next topic, which is the requirements documentation, right? So then we will pick up some simple examples like a hospital management system and maybe a restaurant management system, and then create some requirement specification documents, right? Now,
right. Yeah, like we can work in groups or something like that, so that at least one
I
case
would
study.
give individual assignments. We would anyway, I would suggest you to submit your assignments, and then we'll discuss that in sessions as well, right? So that way, you'll get some feedback on that, right? So it's not that I won't give you any assignments and all. There will be assignments. You'll get to apply that to a particular case study, and then you'll have to submit.
Right.
But this is a lot more. Like I said, elicitation doesn't have a tangible output coming out, right?
Right.
So at the end of it, it's your understanding, right? So elicitation only helps you.
We can just take a small case study. Of course, even if it is an easy one, but at least the approach, we would be very clear with the approach. Like, okay,
right. Agreed, Rupali. So all that we can do only in conjunction with the documentation, right?
Documentation, okay.
Right. So unless we complete that topic, we will not be able to take a case study. So that is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, we will cover the case studies, but it will be at a later point in the session when we talk about requirements documentation as well. Okay. So I know there would be too many confusions at this point in time, but broadly I would suggest get a good understanding about all these elicitation techniques, right? And one suggestion I would have is pick up a small example, right? So a simpler example, not something like this, like maybe a hospital management system, restaurant management system, library management system. The functionality is not so complex, right? So, or a shopping cart. We tend to know the functionality, right? Now for that, broadly list down your SOW, right? So let's say these are the 4 things that I want to do in a hospital management system. I want to register a new doctor, register a new patient. I want to create an appointment, and I want to make the payment, right? So 4 different SOW, and then then think through about each one of those features. Like when I'm doing a doctor registration, what all details I need to ask about the doctor registration process, and so what all it would include. Okay, what all techniques I can use. Okay, so it will help you put your thoughts in a more structured way, right? But again, we're looking at either extremes of it. That would be a very simplest of example, and this is a little the most complicated example, right? Now, most of the projects would be somewhere in between, wherein you read some stuff and then you can gather some understanding about that particular project, right? So something like let's say you're involved in a mobile banking application, right? So that's much easier to understand because we have used some banking applications for performing our transactions like online banking or even a mobile bank we have used. Right? So you fairly tend to understand that much easier compared to a AML compliance system, right? So that would be the case there, right? Now, so one suggestion would be start thinking through those lines, right? So pick up some dummy project, right? And then like your mobile banking app or a hospital management, and then try to capture the requirements into the details, right? So what all, how do I go about getting the details? What all kind of questions I need to ask, right? Figure out those details, how the screen should look like, what all are the data points that I need to capture, what is the process flow, right? You should be clear with all that requirement. So at least do that for one requirement and think through it, right? So only, and then you can, uh, you know, uh, check what all techniques I can use. So maybe, you don't have an SME who's doing the interview and observation, but you can play the dual role. You can do the SME as well as the interviewer. Then say that, okay, you know what, I'll engage with this guy in this way and get these details out, right? Now that's all what we can do, because our role is a lot more interactive. We cannot simulate everything in the session. It's not like a Java course or something where I can give you a program and then you can write it and play, right? Our role requires a lot of collaboration and which is difficult to simulate in a classroom environment, right? So we'll have to work within our assumptions and ensure that uh, we're doing it right. Okay. So let's meet again in tomorrow's session, and we'll start off onto the new topic of how do we go about documenting our requirements. Right? Now that we understand how to get the requirements clear, how to understand the requirements, we'll focus on how to document them as well. Okay? So that would be the focus of the next chapter, chapter 4. All right.